Hey Google, let's talk to AngularFirebase.com.
Sure, here's the test version of AngularFirebase.com. Howdy partner, I'm Angular Firebase. What can I do you for?
What's the latest episode?
The last video was episode 104, Angular CLI Basics Tutorial. Its description goes like this: master the basics of the Angular v6 CLI.
The Google Assistant makes it easy for users to get things done in your app through conversation. In today's episode, we'll build a Google Assistant app from scratch using Dialogflow and Firebase Cloud Functions. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe, and you can grab the source code at AngularFirebase.com. Let's get started by breaking down the demo that I just showed you. The first thing that I said was, hey Google, let's talk to my app name. The app name is something that you register as the developer, and it signifies the main entry point into your Assistant app. When Google finds this app, it's going to start a session in Dialogflow. We've used Dialogflow before in episode 58 to build a chatbot, and it's basically just a high-level tool for building conversational experiences. It uses some crazy machine learning algorithms to handle the natural language processing. So when I say, get the latest episode, it knows that I'm trying to convey this get latest episode intent, which in turn is fulfilled by a Firebase Cloud function that goes out and visits the website, gets the information that we need, and then tells the assistant what to say to the end user. And you can even use a rich card as the response, so the user can just link directly back to your progressive web app that they already have installed on their device. Now that we know how the basic process works, let's start building our Google Assistant app. There are several different ways we can do this, but let's start in the Google Actions console. You can link your assistant to an existing Firebase or Google Cloud project, or you can just create a new one from scratch. From there, you'll select a category, and then the first thing you'll do is determine the entry point for this app. This part's pretty important because it's what the user will say to invoke your app. For example, hey Google, let's talk to AngularFirebase.com. At this point, you could continue building your app in the Actions console, and there's a few templates for doing so. But in most cases, you'll want to switch over to Dialogflow at this point and start building the conversation interface. Click on Actions, then add your first action, and then click Build. Go ahead and create the agent, and then switch over to the Intent screen. You'll have a default welcome intent, which will greet your user when they first initiate your app. You can customize the response as needed, but we're going to create a brand new intent. This one's called Learn About Angular Firebase. There are two basic ways to handle intents. The easiest way is just to create a text response here in Dialogflow, which we'll do for this intent, or you can invoke a Firebase Cloud function to reach out to the outside world to retrieve dynamic data. But first we need to give the bot some training phrases so it knows how to detect the intent. For example, what is Angular Firebase? Dialogflow will use these phrases to refine the machine learning algorithm that's used to detect similar phrases that are said by the end user. The only other thing you need at this point is to send the response back to the user, which we can do with just plain text. So when this intent is triggered, it's going to respond to the user with whatever you put in this text response. And you can add multiple responses too to give some variation to your bot. So that's the most basic use case, but we want to do something a little more advanced. We want to use a cloud function to go out to the Angular Firebase website and figure out what the last episode was. For that, we'll create a new intent, and then we'll add the training phrases just like we did before. But this time, instead of sending a text response, we're going to flip the switch for webhook fulfillment. This tells Dialogflow to send some data to our backend cloud function. Then we can use the Dialogflow SDK for Node.js to handle these intents and respond back to the user. This makes it possible for your bot to do things like update a database, reach out to third-party APIs, send email, or anything else you might do in a Node.js backend. You can code your webhook directly in the browser if you want to, but personally, I wouldn't recommend doing that. A better way to do it is to open up your favorite IDE, and then from the command line, run Firebase init functions. Then I highly recommend using the TypeScript option, and then for everything else, you can just go through with the main defaults. Then cd into the functions directory, and install the Actions on Google SDK. This will help us format the responses that go back to Dialogflow so we can build this app with minimal code. Then for this project, I'm going to install two other dependencies that we'll use to build a simple web scraper, which I'll explain in more detail later. For right now, just install node fetch and Cheerio. Then we'll write all of the code in the index.ts file. First, we'll import our dependencies, Then we can import Dialogflow from the Actions on Google SDK. It also includes a bunch of helpers for formatting rich cards that you send in the response, for example, that card that would link us back to our progressive web app. Then the app itself is very similar conceptually to Express.js. You can think of each intent like an HTTP endpoint that we need to handle whenever it gets triggered. We can say app intent with get latest episode, and then this will take a callback function to handle the intent. And because we're fetching data from the outside world asynchronously, we'll make this an async function. For right now, I'm setting up a placeholder variable called data, which will eventually scrape the web for the data that we want on AngularFirebase.com. Eventually, it will return a title, description, and episode number for the bot to use. We can then say conversation close or conversation ask to continue the conversation with the user. If you use ask, it's going to keep the conversation open. If you use close, it will end the Dialogflow session after that response is sent. In this case, our bot has nothing else to do, so we're going to use conversation close. You could just pass in a string here, but I think it's easier to use a simple response, which allows you to control both the text and the speech that the bot will return. So the text will be nice and concise, and then the speech will contain additional information such as the full episode description. So that's great for text and speech only applications, but things like smartphones can handle more than just text and speech. In this case, we can send back a card that will deep link to our app and take the user exactly where they want to go. This works great for both progressive web apps and native mobile apps. And it's just a great way to build engagement with your users. And that's pretty much all there is to it on the Dialogflow side. The only missing piece at this point is how do we get this actual information from the website? I'm not going to talk about this code in detail because it has nothing to do with the assistant, but all it's doing is fetching the web page and then using Cheerio to traverse the DOM to find the information that we need. It's just a classic web scraper. First, we need to fetch the page asynchronously. Then on this particular web page, we have a feed of lessons, so we want to pull the first lesson from the page along with its content. Then we can extract the text that is contained within the various elements inside this div. Then we'll return everything as a plain JavaScript object so we can use it in the method that we had defined earlier to handle the intent. The final step is to export our function, which we'll name fulfillment. It needs to be an HTTPS function, and it will take the Dialogflow app as its argument. Now open up another command line terminal and run Firebase deploy only functions. When that's finished, you can go to the Firebase console and verify that it's been deployed in the Functions tab, and grab the URL endpoint. Then switch back over to the Fulfillment tab in Dialogflow and paste it as the webhook fulfillment URL. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You've now successfully built your own Google Assistant app. Go back to the Actions on Google console and test it out. You can also test it out on any device that's connected to your Gmail account. That means you can start testing it out right away on your Android or iPhone device or on your Google Home device. But to release it to the public, you'll go through a very similar process to the Google Play Store for Android apps, where you have an alpha, beta, and then production release once it's ready to go live. Overall, this technology is super exciting, and there's tons of opportunities for business to engage their customers in ways that weren't possible before. The demand for conversation apps is growing rapidly, so it's something you definitely want to be aware of and familiar with as a developer. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up there. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, reach out to me on Slack. And if you're ready to go beyond the basics, consider becoming a pro member at AngularFirebase.com to get access to exclusive content designed to help you build and ship your app faster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.